So, I'm on.
अच्छा फाइन फाइन ओके गुड
76. Good morning. Welcome you all for the 76th of the science lecture series. Today, before we the official lecture, we will have some science forum with the organizing organization. We have quick introduction about the science forum. Come after. So I'm very much happy to host the last science forum. It's at the organization it was started like what some of the people okay in the Madras University, also in IIT. So we all those persons, professors joined together and started Abdullah science forum in 1951. So even when we started, the Abdullah science forum was started with the intention of integrating in the environment, the education, and the social dimension of science. So originally, when it was started, it was conducting only a hall meeting like this year. This was going on for nearly 3 or 4 years. Subsequently, the Tamil Science Forum completely extended. So in fact, it becomes from now we are all over. We have got about 6,000 members are there now. Tamil Science Forum organization. And Tamil Science Forum organization has extended that it's lots of lot of activities are various spreads like science communication, science education, intervention in school science education. And we are also publishing 2 magazines. One in Tamil, one in English. It is called Today, it's meant for school children. And Jantar Matter, it's at the English science popularization. It's at the higher scientific level of here. So we need a lot of people because our activity is also increasing day by day. We need a lot of people, we need a lot of experts to come and enrich the Tamil side for myself. For everyone, there is a different kind of activities that each one can fit himself in one particular activities here. So that if you all come and help us, it will be really great and really great. So I'm these few words in Tamil side forum. I invite you to all first join, become members of Tamil side forum and participate in Tamil side forum. The activities is involved. Thank you, sir. Now, few words about the speaker. We have Jawaharlal the speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today's lecture, Dr. Ganesh. Dr. Ganesh is an assistant professor at Krea University, Chemistry Department. He holds a PhD in chemistry from Iowa State University, USA. Stints at Jawaharlal Center for Advanced Scientific Research and Abdullah University of Science and Technology. This research focuses on developing materials for sustainable energy. And today, he will share his insights with us on sustainability. Now, let us move on to the topic of today's lecture, that is demystifying sustainability. Global concerns to scientific. As we all know, humanity's rapid progress has come at a cost. We have achieved unprecedented prosperity in all walks of life, also facing drastic increase in resulting in climate change. Access to key resources like today, Dr. Ganesh will delve into the key role sustainable innovation can addressing these challenges. He will demystify carbon capture, storage, and utilization, and explore a multi-pronged approach to achieving a net zero carbon future. Additionally, he will discuss the availability for water capture. Please join me in welcoming slide 1, demystifying sustainability.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah. So everyone can hear me, right? So, like even though I've put a little bit about water, I'll mostly be talking about carbon capture because I think that is the issue right now that we all have to focus on, and if possible, get more people involved in scientific research to take care of this persistent problem. So the thing is, global warming, everyone is aware of global warming, right? So it's a huge problem right now. And see, we are currently being trained to look at carbon dioxide as the enemy. It's not. Carbon dioxide has always been there. And the whole reason that we can live in this atmosphere is because of the presence of greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane and water vapor also. Like if we didn't have these gases in the atmosphere, they would probably be a complete ice age. You'll have really low temperatures. So what's happened right now is because of the industrial revolution. Like we've done so much advances in industrial revolution, we are putting more carbon dioxide than is sustainable in the atmosphere. So that's why it's time to understand that CO2 which is in excess, either we try to limit how we advance in industrially, or we try to use that CO2 as a resource instead of letting it be a harmful pollutant. So that's what is I'm meaning by sustainability. Like we need to understand to come into balance with the atmosphere and try to reduce the amount of CO2 we are emitting and also use it. So if you look at this particular graphic, this is what everybody has. This is the understanding that you have of global warming, right? You have this common image it's kind of a misconception, because what's happening is the news that goes around is that these gases are trapped in the atmosphere. It's reflecting heat back or light back. But the actual reason why it's happening. 1 second. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So this is a more direct explanation of what's happening in our atmosphere. Okay. So CO2, CH4, water vapor has always been there in the atmosphere. But now the amount of CO2 is so high that it's causing this particular process. So essentially, when we get light from the sun, right, you're getting solar radiation, you need it for warmth, you need it for visibility, everything, whatever it is. But some of the light is absorbed by our Earth's surface, right? And this light, some of it may be directly reflected back into the atmosphere as it is, whatever comes in goes back out. But some of it is reflected back as infrared radiation. See, most of the molecules that are in the atmosphere, like nitrogen, water vapor, all these other molecules, I mean, water vapor does, but like nitrogen and oxygen does not interact with these infrared radiation. Whereas carbon dioxide, right, it will interact with this. It will absorb that infrared radiation, and instead of allowing it to go back into the atmosphere, it deflects it back into the, it emits it back onto our Earth's atmosphere and all this. And that's why the heating is so much. The energy of these infrared rays is very high. Okay, so you can understand from this that earlier the small quantities of CO2 that was there is what was maintaining our global climate. If you didn't have the CO2, you just have a perpetual ice age. In fact, the Earth has been known to go through multiple cycles of ice age and then a normal greenhouse age. There have been greenhouse ages and then ice ages. It always does this dance of going between an ice age and a greenhouse age. But right now, I'll show you in the next graph. So if you look at this, right, it's not shown fully, but over time, what has happened? Like this is starting from 1950 to 2020. If you see before this period of 90, this is mostly the industrial revolution has taken place at this period of time. This is data, right? Now you see, now everybody's using data to tell you how the world is. And you can see that, a huge amount of the polluting nations like US and China and even India is here. So given our population, we are not polluting as much, we're not emitting as much CO2, but all these countries, like because of their rapid advancement in industrial efficiency, they're emitting too much CO2. So it's becoming a problem, and everybody's decided that we need to take care of this soon. If we don't, you're going to have unconventional climate patterns. You're going to have flooding when it's not flooding. You'll have rain when it should not be raining. And some places are completely getting devoid of water. You don't have water anymore because of this change in climate, right? So basically what I'm going to talk about in this talk, the main thrust of my talk today will be about how we can address this anthropogenic CO2. See, at this particular, the way the economy is, the way the world is, we will continue to use fossil fuel. We'll continue to use petrol. They will talk about solar energy, electricity, and different types of alternative energies. But they've been talking about this for the last 30 years. So for sure, all the big oil companies, the companies that control how the world is run right now, will continue to use fossil fuels. So CO2 emissions are not going to come down anytime soon. So the only thing to do now is to find ways to utilize that CO2 instead of letting it stay in the atmosphere. Okay. So most of my talk today will be about addressing CO2 through capture, material design to capture it, and using it. So by training, I am a chemist who does heterogeneous catalysis. So I make materials which take the CO2 and convert it to fuel like methanol, ethanol, or gasoline, even jet fuel. Okay. So those two areas, basically how we capture and how we use it. See, this is the standard process. Okay. Now, electricity, if we're having electricity in the building, it's because there's a coal plant somewhere distant that's supplying an electricity grid. You cannot live without this coal plant, right? And the emission from a flue gas, from every coal plant has at least 12% of CO2. Okay. And this is what is primarily adding to all our increased emission in the world and global warming itself. So traditionally, what the industries do is they do use this thing called amine scrubbing, which is like a liquid solution. It's a amine which can capture only CO2. When this flue gas, it's around 70% of this, or more than 70% of this, is nitrogen. You don't want to waste your time capturing that. You can just let it back into the atmosphere. It's not doing anything, right? But this 12% of CO2, you want to capture it, and either you can use it for so what people do is they use it to do enhanced oil recovery. Like in oil fields, if you want the oil to come out more faster, they shove the CO2 into the ground and forcibly push the oil out. It's more efficient at pushing oil out. So that's one way, and that's how we've been doing it mostly. Or that CO2 is just liquefied and kept. You can use it as dry ice, you can use it as a coolant for many options. But that's not enough. The rate at which we are developing and causing CO2 emissions, we need to find other uses for that CO2. Okay, so this is how they typically do it. But the problem with this amine solution, this is industrially, both these processes are industrially scaled. Okay, like I told you, all our electricity comes from thermal coal-fired plants. Whereas the amine scrubbing is also industrially used. What they do is they change that solvent every 6 months. It's very expensive, and this amine solution finally becomes a pollutant in your water bodies, in your rivers, or it's in landfill and all this. Right? It's not a very good thing to have in your environment, but it's there. So people use this then to make CH4, like CO2 can be, there are many catalysts, many materials that can convert the CO2 into methane, and that methane is what you use in your autos and all for the compressed natural gas, right? But this part is the problem. How we capture that CO2 and how we utilize it, okay? So I'm just going to talk about a few methods that have already been what is this? Why is this not? So this thing is, oh, okay. So this is a news article from recently. So this particular company, it's called Climeworks. They've scaled it up. This is in Iceland, okay? These are basically huge fans. They're just huge fans which suck air. This is not next to a coal plant, but they've been using this technology for flue plants also. I'm just showing this. It's called direct air capture. What this plant is doing is in many isolated areas across the globe, right now they've set up these plants. They can capture gigatons of carbon dioxide. Okay, these fans suck in the air and it captures only CO2 and releases the rest of the air, rest of the gases back into the air. Okay. So, but the material that is at the heart of this, right, they cannot use those amine solutions. So typically you need something to capture that thing, the quantity of that CO2. But if they have to use that amine solution, they'll have to replace it every now and then, which is not feasible. And it's not economically viable also. You cannot scale it up for globally to address this. Okay. So instead, they use these porous frameworks. These are relatively new materials. They were started in around 2001. So my talk will have a significant allusion to this particular material. They are called metal organic frameworks. Okay, and these are very common everywhere now. Even many research institutions across Chennai, like IIT Madras and even SRM University. All these places there are many groups who are working on these materials, metal organic frameworks and covalent organic frameworks. So this is I don't want to bore anyone with chemistry because it's a popular science lecture, right? But this material, right, 1 gram of this, many of these materials have very huge surface area. So 1 gram of this could have the surface area of a football field. There are materials that have been known to have like 6,000 meters squared per gram or much more than that, okay? So they're very small materials, but they can capture these gases and you can design them to capture specific gases. Okay, and they're very stable for very high temperatures also. So some of them are stable as high as 600 degrees Celsius, 500 to 600 degrees Celsius. So it can capture the gas, store it infinitely for you, and then when you want it, you can release it back. As you can see, some of these things are good for hydrogen. So these have also been proposed for as storage materials for your hydrogen cars, right? Like for example, hydrogen is a very light gas. It's very difficult to compress and carry as a liquid fuel in your cars. So one of the propositions is to use these type of materials, which are very highly porous, and they can capture these gases and store them, and you can utilize them more efficiently. Otherwise, there's nothing to replace petrol, nothing to replace gasoline. So these are the materials. Right now, they are somewhat slightly expensive, but more and more new MOFs, more and more research, like public-private partnerships are trying to discover materials which can be scalable and more economically viable. Okay. So most of my talk will be about these materials and how they are being used to, not just academically, we're not just publishing papers anymore. People are actually demonstrating this on scale for use. Okay. So this is a company called Swante. So in that big thing that I showed you where they have the direct air capture, they use these materials. This is a particular MOF. It's called CALF20. It was developed in the University of Calgary. And this is this compared to the ones I showed you before, it's a much more economic. You can make it on kg scale quantities in a day. Like very easy to make that MOF. It just uses very simple organic chemistry. Okay, one of the other selfish reasons to give this talk was to tell you that you don't only have to do engineering and medicine. These are solutions. You can join the science, journey and try to make materials like this and answer problems that are current, right? So this material was made in the University of Calgary. A group of PhD students and their supervisor, they've discovered this material. It is very cheap, it's easily scalable, and it can capture CO2 very, very efficiently. See, you can pass a gas mixture. See, our atmosphere has majority nitrogen, almost 71% of our atmosphere is nitrogen, right? You don't want to waste time capturing that. That's a harmless gas. But you want to capture CO2 and bring it down to pre-industrial levels. And these materials are highly efficient. They were so successful, this company is now commercializing them. So you can go onto this company's website and buy this MOF. So that particular unit that I showed you where they do the direct air capture, instead of the amine solution, they have this now in large quantities, and this captures the CO2. It's going to start in January in 2025, and they are going to start and see how good this experiment is. But if it works, it can be implemented across the globe. Resources are also very less. You don't need to be too worried about all the requirements for these kind of facilities, right? So this is a paper by a colleague of mine. He's now in IIT Kanpur in the Sustainable Energy and Engineering department. So they use that same MOF, that CALF20, and they incorporated it into wood. They first bleach the wood. You get any wood. You can get any wood. Wood is typically lignin based, right? You remove the lignin first, and you get this porous wood. This porous wood, if you use it as is, right, it's not very good. Like if you must have come across activated carbon and other porous materials in available already from we commonly use it, right? But you want to increase the surface area of this even more to capture CO2. So you can put these CALF20 MOFs in it. So this is the same. They use the same MOF. It's commercially available now. Everyone, you, me, anyone can go and buy this if you want to use it for a particular purpose. That's the whole point of the technology, right? Like solar cells, at one point they were experimental, but now they are ubiquitously available. Everybody can use it. So even solar cells, people are developing, the efficiency is not that good. You need to get the ongoing research right now in many parts of the world is to improve the solar cell efficiency. But these MOFs have already come to scale, and there are many more being discovered that can be cheap and effectively scaled and incorporated into this many easily available raw materials, and you can capture CO2 on a much larger scale. Okay. Yeah, once again. Yeah, so now this is perfect, right? You've captured the CO2. You got this material, this wonderful material. You got this wonderful series of materials which can capture CO2 en masse in large quantities. But what do you do with that CO2? You can't keep on capturing it, right? You have to do something with it. So this part is where I have been working. Okay, this is the work I've been doing in my PhD, and then even in my when I went to do a postdoctoral fellow in KAUST in King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. See there, my primary source of funding was from an oil company. Okay, it's called Saudi Aramco. So now they have the biggest, stakeholders. They are the biggest stakeholders in this process because they're the most polluters also, right? They need to get they're the ones who are pumping all the oil around the world. They're the billion-dollar company. Okay, and they influence policy decisions across the world, like Shell, ConocoPhillips, Saudi Aramco. They, whether you like it or not, they run the world, and we buy oil from them. But they are also interested in addressing this problem because they know their fuel reserves are not going to last long, right? It's 100 years max. After that, they need to start finding other ways to, diversify their profits. So the best way to get these companies on board with you, with the scientists, is to tell them, okay, there's a benefit in this. We are capturing the CO2. We can convert this to something useful. So most of my projects in KAUST, when I was a postdoc there, was funded by Saudi Aramco. And they would not give like small change. They would give huge amounts of money because they want to see this problem addressed. They know they've caused it. They want to try and address it. So, yeah. So yeah, this is the anthropogenic. So this, basically the idea is now you want to bring down the CO2 back to the levels it was before 1950, 1940, whatever, when the industrial age kind of boomed, right? You saw that chart I showed you. Like pre-1950 levels. If you can bring it to that, we can prevent, at least we can reduce the extent of global warming or climate change. Okay. So this is a typical, what do you call this, cycle? It's called we are aiming for this concept called carbon circularity. Whatever carbon we are putting out into the air, take it back and use it, make something, and again use that as a fuel, keep on things. So one of the most important discoveries in this respect was the discovery of this catalyst. It's a very simple catalyst, okay, copper, zinc, alumina. So earlier, this company, BASF, it's a very big company and everybody is aware of it. I think they even have a center in Chennai, BASF, right? So they used to make this catalyst called zinc oxide and chromium oxide. So catalysts are solid materials, okay, they're like powders, basically powders. Your baking soda, all those are typically you can use baking soda sometimes as a catalyst. Okay, so these are inorganic materials, sometimes even organic materials, which can interact with these gases, and the gas will absorb on the surface of these powders and get and with the correct temperature, with the correct pressure, the correct interaction with that surface or that molecule with that powder, it can form something else. Typically, in this case, we make methanol and even formic acid, and you can even make gasoline. A lot of the projects right now, like Saudi Aramco, all these companies, they try to capture CO2 and make jet fuel from it. And it's very easy to do it. But the thing is scalability, like how will governments and policymakers recognize this? Okay. So this catalyst, when it was first made, it required very huge energy requirements. So basically the energy we use to make the CO2 into methanol was even more than the CO2 we converted. So we ended up emitting more CO2 than the CO2 we were converting into methanol. So when they discovered this catalyst, right, by ICI, now there's a company called Johnson Matthey. They have taken over this catalyst patent and they're the ones who make it now. It's the catalyst that has not changed for the last 70 years. It's the best catalyst and nobody's been able to make a material that beats it. Okay, because you're using what? Copper, zinc, and alumina. These are very easily available, right? And you can make this catalyst. In fact, we do make it. When I was in JNCASR, I worked with a faculty called Professor Sebastian Peter there. So he works with Tata Steel and Coal India, and they're setting up gigaton plants in Telangana and other places to do this, to capture CO2 and convert it into methanol. So this catalyst with slight variations is still today, it's what is being used. If you're getting methanol from somewhere, if you're working in a university or if you're working in a pharmaceutical company, if you're getting methanol, it's coming from this catalyst. They either use CO2 or they use syngas, carbon monoxide and hydrogen. Like for example, CO2 can be mixed with another greenhouse gas, methane. And again, these kind of materials can convert it into syngas, which can be converted to methanol. Okay. So this is what we are aiming for, and we are hoping that more and more catalysts can be made and scaled up on the industrial level to improve the efficiency and bring down the CO2 levels in the atmosphere. Okay, so yeah, so like I was telling you, we're bringing it all together, right? Initially, I showed you that big unit in Iceland where they're building more facilities like this around the world. They're directly capturing air, they're concentrating the CO2, removing the nitrogen, sending it back into the atmosphere. And then that CO2 can be converted into gasoline, methanol, many products. Okay, you can convert into jet fuel, diesel, gasoline, any of these things. Okay, so the answer is staring us right in the face. It's just that more and more people have to get involved in this and try to use it, see it as a resource. So you can kill two birds with one stone. You can get rid of global warming, or at least you can mitigate it, and you can make useful fuels which are useful for everyone. Like the coal, like the fossil fuels are not going to last forever, but the CO2 will remain permanently in the atmosphere. Right? So many people are already doing this, and this is typically this catalyst. Okay, this catalyst, we used to make it right now at our facility where I work. We can make per day 1 kg. It's very easy to make, and it takes like 2-3 hours to make it, and it's highly efficient. Okay, and people use it everywhere, right? And it's very cost effective. So as far as this is concerned, like what I'm trying to be like I'm trying to propose is that people get more involved in science. And there are these materials, they probably are just waiting to be made at some table or the bench where you're working. And it won't take long for you to, look into it and try to discover it. See, but there's one problem with this, so whatever I've shown you so far, even these methods, we typically now in the academic labs and in the industry, we use thermal reactors. Okay, we use heat reactors where we have to supply temperature, we have to supply pressure. For example, this reaction happens at 50 bar, that is 50 atmospheres of what we're experiencing right now. So you need some CO2 and hydrogen. The hydrogen usually comes from an electrolyzer. Like there are many, even electrolyzers are ubiquitous now. They can make it on, industries use water, they split water to get the hydrogen. So it's almost economical now. It's also green, it's not too bad. But still there's a problem that you are supplying energy. You still need electricity to run this, you need a lot of electricity to run these plants. Some of these plants are, they don't change the catalyst for 10 years, 10 to 15 years. They retain it as it is. And over time, the catalyst efficiency and even the reactor itself, the efficiency degrades. Okay, so we have to find better ways. So catalysis is not just restricted to doing it thermally, like this supply of energy. There are other methods. So I'll just briefly talk about these other methods. So this is something that's new. Okay, this is what's happening. People are using electrocatalysis, electrolysis, like a typical We've known for the longest time that we can use electrolyzers to split water, get hydrogen, and that's why it's almost come to the industrial level where hydrogen cars are being spoken about. But now this technology is also being explored for CO2 capture and conversion electrocatalytically. So the advantage of this is, this happens at room temperature. The previous process that I showed you, which is industrially scaled and everybody's using it, we do it from 250 to 300 degrees Celsius. So it's a huge energy cost, right? I mean, it's still kind of net zero, but you want to be even more, you want to make it completely, even if you can, try to make it carbon negative also. Try to get it as at a low energy cost as possible. So nowadays, people are trying to do it through electrocatalysis and even through light. So photo catalysis of CO2 and converting into fuel. So one advantage of this is you can get a lot of liquid fuels. Right now, the problem is with the catalyst design, people are not able to control the kind of products you can get. So like the problem with most catalysts, they give you like ethanol, methanol, formic acid, butane. It's all mixed into the same kind of thing. You cannot separate it easily. So catalyst design is being focused. It's still very academic. It's going to be a long time before this becomes scalable on an industrial level, but it's happening. Okay, it's like the future. And right now, the most easy product they're making is carbon monoxide. That's still better because once you get the carbon monoxide, you can send it to a thermal reactor and you can convert it to methanol more easily. Carbon monoxide is more easy to convert. Like CO2 is very resistant to conversion. So that's why we need to use like very high pressure and very high temperature. Whereas carbon monoxide is more reactive. Okay. So right now, most of these people who are doing electrocatalytically, they're converting CO2, they are mostly getting this product, carbon monoxide. Okay. And some amount of people are getting methanol, and some people are getting ethylene also, which is also very useful for plastic making, right? So this is one good thing about this electrocatalytic method that's being explored academically right now. If you are interested, like if you're if you're in research, if you're chemistry or physics or anything else, or even in chemical engineering, if you read most of the papers, it uses copper as the catalyst. Copper is again cheap. I don't know why recently there's been an increase in the copper's price. It could be because of its applications. It's a very good catalyst both in thermal catalysis as well as in electrochemically converting CO2 into ethylene. Ethylene is what we use for polyethylene, right? So now I'll quickly, I just have two more slides. I'll just talk about how these materials can also be used for water capture. Okay. So this is the same, it's similar to the MOF that I was showing you earlier. That MOF CALF 20 was for CO2 capture, right? This is a MOF, it's called MOF 303. It was made again in the US and they've scaled it up. Okay, this MOF, they've taken it to desert areas. So now you have a water shortage in desert areas, right? Like if you go to the Middle East, most of their water that they get is through desalination. You have to use a membrane. And even I think in Chennai now, because of the water problems, a lot of desalination plants are being set up. Desalination is the most industrially scaled up process. You make a membrane, those membranes have been known for the last 50 years, and then you can easily filter out any solids or salts from it, and you can get potable water, right? But this, in certain desert areas, you may not be close to a water body. So if the humidity is high, these kind of materials can capture the water from the air itself, from the moisture from the air itself, and then a slight amount of heating will release the water back. It just temporarily holds it. So all these materials, they don't chemically combine with that water or the CO2. They just hold it for time being, like through weak forces, weak interactive forces. And with the slightest amount of supply of energy, it can release it back, either the CO2 or the water. Okay. So these are getting attention now as not only for CO2 capture and hydrogen capture, also for water capture from the atmosphere in areas where it's arid or humid, and you want to be able to supply water more in a more ready-made fashion. So this group, this professor's name is Professor Omar Yagi. He's a very big deal, and every year that Nobel Prize committee convenes, we all put bets on saying that he might win the Nobel Prize for chemistry, but it hasn't happened for the last 10 years. But he has single-handedly founded this field, and he is the first person to demonstrate that this water capture can be done, on a scalable fashion. So they've used a simple setup where they put this MOF inside, and they allow air to circulate through it in an arid region where the humidity is reasonably high. A place like Chennai, the humidity is certainly high, right? And there may be places where you don't have enough water. So these kind of materials can help in addressing this concern. Okay. So these more and more materials are being developed for both water capture and CO2, right? So two very persistent problems in our society. So I would say, like, this whole aspect of giving this talk was to make sure that you understand that there are so many more materials that you can discover by getting into this whole race of understanding what science can contribute to society and trying to make these materials and address real world concerns, not just to, be an academic. We have to start getting involved more in society and seeing that our solutions can translate from the lab or from a classroom into the real world. Okay. So yeah, so basically that is my talk, and I want to say that now science has found its way to make these materials, and they've demonstrated its appearance. Policymakers have to get involved. Like governments have to realize that if we get involved and try to encourage this kind of research and try to develop more of these materials, it's good for the whole society, not just for a few people, not just for the sake of building science. Okay. So that's my talk. If you have any questions, especially the young people, like I don't know. Yeah, okay.
First day.
Bring the mic.
Yeah.
Plants during photosynthesis can break down water into hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah.
So can we somehow make that?
Yeah. So the thing is, so now what plants do, like CO2, right? So that's like the holy grail. Okay, everybody's been trying to do that for the longest time, and there are some groups they call it artificial leaves. So you can make nanomaterials and try to do it at room temperature. So I didn't talk about that topic. I talked about electrocatalytically and thermocatalytically. Photocatalytically, there are people who make these materials, but right now it's very, very in the infancy stage. Like the materials they're using are mostly TiO2, titanium oxide, which are photoactive. It has to be photoactive. See, because in plants, they have those photo components to break down CO2 and make sugar and all this, right? Whatever it is. So it's an ongoing research, but we have not been able to match the efficiency of plants yet. So, but there is academic, like what you asked just now, it's happening.
After the total emission of CO2,
Yeah.
how much is captured? You said
See, at some point we'll have to stop. If it gets, right now, no one has any hope in this. They feel like it's, it's a very, they're talking a big game, but they won't do it. So they have to start demonstrating it first, because right now we've exceeded the limit of CO2. Right now we should have roughly, say, I forgot the exact concentration of CO2. Like we are at 500 ppm of CO2, which is very high. But the original limit before 1950 was around 200 or something, or much less. I'm not sure exactly how much. 280. It was around 280. Now we've come to 500, and we're rapidly increasing. So till 1950, or like for a long period, almost like 400 years, the amount of CO2 was around that, it was fluctuating around that 250 to 300. We've exceeded in 50 years, we've exceeded to 500. And we're like, it's not stopping. So at least if we bring it back to that level, right? See, this is how, so policy scientists have to be there. They are always constantly, scientists have been warning us for the last 40 years. The ppm level is going up, ppm level is going up. No one's listening. So at some point, if this is successful and the ppm level does come down, they can tell us, okay, listen, now stop. Or like go more slowly. Like the problem with all these technologies is once it becomes profitable, people don't want to stop. Right? So it has to yet be tried. Nobody believes that it'll work, but they've demonstrated in the lab scale and the bench scale and in smaller scales. So we'll have to see.
So he said this percentage of the CO2 is sufficient to avoid global warming, sir.
Right now, no. Right now, it's too much. So we've crossed the limit. Like if we continue like this at this rate, there are going to be places in the world where there'll be unbearable temperatures. Like in Bangalore recently, when I was there in April and temperatures went almost up to 40. And we were aware, right, in Delhi that there was like 48 degrees this year in summer,
Highest.
49 degrees. So that's because of this. So if we don't do something about this, you're going to have places where you have ridiculous changes, shifts in the climate, and like rains happening, flooding everywhere. So if one place is going to not have water, one place is going to have too much temperature, some other place is going to feel the opposite consequence. So everything is linked ultimately, right? So you need to deal with this problem early for everyone's benefit.
Why has there been a change in the last 2 years?
That I mean, it's been actually, yeah.
Suddenly you see global warming, you see floods.
I think it's been happening. It's probably we are noticing it only now.
3 years ago, it wasn't so bad.
Like when was that year? What was that year in 2016? That flooding in Chennai, right?
No, 2015.
15.
Yeah, but this is a global phenomenon.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, like the last 5 years, even like places in Europe, they think they're insulated from this. Even they were experiencing very high temperatures.
But I think correspondingly, there are places which have dropped in their rainfall, which we don't talk about, because that doesn't seem like a disaster.
Yeah.
Flooding seems like a disaster, so we talk about it. But there are places, I think, where the rainfall has decreased. water shortage.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the news doesn't, it's not big news.
Like in Bangalore, this is actually Bangalore, it was big news because we didn't have water for the entire, like there was a panic from March, from January itself. But yeah,
Like a global thing.
we-
But any flooding and, like Bombay is suffering from enormous flooding in the last
Yeah.
few days.
Delhi
That's
also
become big
Gurgaon.
news and everybody talks about it. I have this question. See, the pre-industrial revolution levels were like 250, 280 ppm of carbon dioxide, which has now become about, as you said, 425, close to 500. Now, whatever has been put there, it's very hard to get it back
Yeah.
because that's a global phenomenon. That's not going to be possible. So I think the thrust should be, and which is what I think most policymakers are trying to do, is to make sure that you don't put any more,
Yes.
and therefore don't contribute to the carbon dioxide. That's why we talk about zero carbon footprints
Yes.
and so on. But even if you did that, it's going to be quite, even if tomorrow we achieve zero carbon footprint, which we are not going to, it is the damage that we have done is
irreparable.
in some ways, almost there for a long time to come, that we'll see the repercussions. I also see the repercussion in another way. If you put more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the temperature rises. When the temperature rises, there'll be more evaporation of water, which also is a greenhouse gas, and
Yes.
therefore it's a runaway condition. Because of the higher water vapor content
because
in
you're
the
not focusing-
atmosphere, that is going to increase the temperature, and
Temperature.
that is again going to put more water in. So now CO2 is not the big issue.
Water.
I'm just saying that the water content in the atmosphere increasing, that might become a severe issue.
So yeah, they should, I mean, we typically have
So
to look at both of them together, CO2
Yes.
and water.
Because we sort of like, we don't worry about the water content, but that is also constantly rising. If you increase your temperature, you're going to increase your water content, which is going to cause a greater greenhouse effect, increase in a further temperature. So the condition is a runaway condition out there. So I think the thrust should be really on industries and automobiles and so on, having carbon capture in their effluents, so that you at least don't contribute any more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. And the damage is something that you have already.
See, but now the problem is most of these companies, so like these companies like Climeworks and all these, they are selling carbon credits. So someone who's like a company like say Toyota or General Motors, they are not going to change the engines because for them it's a net. We have to convince them that there's a profitability in changing the way your engines work.
Yeah.
They're not going to change it because that's going to hit their baseline.
Yeah.
So what they do instead is they buy carbon credits for companies like Climeworks and say, okay, listen, you take care of the capturing of whatever carbon dioxide we're putting into the air, and we'll keep our cars the way they are and make more profits.
Yeah.
So that's the unfortunate thing. But
And the point that one of these or a person in the audience raised about photochemical methods, I think only photochemical methods are really sustainable, because all electrochemical methods which use
Still needs-
electricity,
it still
and
needs-
electricity has been prepared from
Coal
fossil
fuel.
fuels.
yeah,
So that's not really, the moment you bring electricity, it is no longer green. Somewhere somebody has used fossil fuels to create that electricity. So you can't say, I use electricity, therefore I am green. No, as a society, we are not green. Because the electricity was actually produced by somebody
Coal.
else by using fossil fuels or coal or whatever, which is an issue.
see, but
I think it is really the photochemical methods that will
but
provide
it's taking time because the materials that do
Yes.
they're kind of expensive, and there are very few of them are actually photoactive. So, but it's one of the hot areas of research right now. It's not scaled.
Planting more tree to help.
No, as that was earlier a solution, but we've
No, I think it will help,
It will help.
but we won't do it because we are cutting trees
Yeah.
in the name of development. So
planting trees.
planting trees,
That's
certainly
actually
help.
the most practical solution right now.
Yeah.
We should plant more trees, but that's
unfortunately,
again has to be a
society-
policy. Government policy has to. Like so now we are more into mining. So clearing large swathes of forest. See, India is actually, if you see this,
Building industry.
building industry.
yeah. If you see this, I'll go back to the slide. See, India, given our population, we are not contributing as these people, especially US and China and the European.
Getting there.
We're getting there, but like that's because one of the reasons we don't contribute so much is we actually have good green cover. We have better green cover than Like China and India actually has better green cover than the US and most of the so-called first world countries. So, but if we go away from that mission, it's yeah.
This is a limited even for tree plantation.
No, so because see that it's the most easy thing to do.
Amount of carbon dioxide everywhere.
Hmm. Yeah, it's not good. It's definitely not going to bring it down. It's not going to automatically bring it down to 250, 280. But at least it's a step. It's one of the, you have to do multiple things at the same time. You cannot just do one thing, right? We cannot just say, okay, let's just put this huge direct and just focus on it. All the companies will buy their carbon credits from them. No. We have to do things like, in a coordinated fashion, plant trees, invest in technology, try to change the way existing technology is. So only these multiple steps will help.
Raghu, let me ask you this question. When you have this the greenhouse effect becoming very, very important, and suddenly we see places which are having unusual rains and so on, is it nature's way of correcting itself? Because when you have more rain, you will dissolve some carbon dioxide in water and bring it. So maybe is it nature's way of correcting and trying to reduce the
So I think like
it's a very philosophical and hypothetical question.
See, when we do this, right, when we say this, nature, we are attributing some kind of personality to nature, like it's a vengeful creature. But I think it's just very practical. It's just
in this case, it's not vengeful. It's actually trying to help us.
Yeah.
So as you keep increasing the CO2, suddenly you have enormous amounts of rain because carbon dioxide has a certain solubility in water.
Yeah.
So that will reduce the CO2 levels.
How much, to what extent, we don't know, right? I mean, locally.
And the more places you have such heavy rains and cyclones and typhoons and so on, the more CO2 that you're going to reduce.
But then even that CO2, right? Like for example, now it's going to slightly
get down to 80.
So
I think we have done enough.
yeah, that should stop first. Like the amount of
all these methods like carbon capture, all these do not work that much.
I mean, they are in the infancy. It will take some time. It's not being scaled up fast enough to address this.
Immediate things are that
Yeah. The most straightforward thing everybody can do without government approval is plant trees. Right. That's a starting point.
It's almost like the saying they say,
So, but again,
what would be like hydrogen side?
see, hydrogen also, right? Ultimately, that hydrogen is being generated how? Through electrolysis. So that electrolysis, see, if you can make, see now the most of the electrolysis, they are using other sources like like solar panels and all this to generate the electricity required for water splitting. But you still need for that most of the solar panels, right? The efficiency is very low, like say 20%. So you need like a ton of solar panels for one electrolyzer to work properly. So that is another area of research that's being improved. Like they're trying to make solar panels more efficient, energy efficient. So hydrogen is not, I don't think it's a solution.
So based on like carbon.
See, right now, this is what I noticed when I was in the US, they used to try to do these hybrid methods. Some of these cars, which are hybrids, right? They have both electricity and a fossil fuel component. So if more people can practically implement it, like you reduce your use of fossil fuel, don't become completely independent of it, but use it in some capacity with an electric component. That's the starting point. So, and there are other ways like in construction industry, like for example, I didn't talk about it, but people are making concrete right now using the CO2. So that carbon, it's called carbicrete. So when you make concrete, basically the building structure, whatever you're doing, it's the highest emitter of CO2. Instead of that, if you can incorporate your CO2 into your brick making or into your material making, you are again bringing about a certain amount of circularity. So these are small solutions we have to keep on building up to,
The same thing. Electric car. Very much. Yeah, because to charge the electric car, the electricity.
Of course,
Burning coke. Second lithium ion, second other kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, like that is something we have to do now because there's so much in the atmosphere. You need to start looking at it as a source of, start looking at it as a fuel, as a raw fuel. If you can, like planting trees will take you only so far. And our energy needs are becoming more and more. Right now, everyone is using ACs. You're going to use more electricity, pollute more, put more CO2 into the atmosphere. Like that 50, within 50 years, you've gone from 280 or 250 to like 500. It's not going to stop.
You have the idea why we are not being
That's what, sir, my last slide, no? So what's happening is governments and policymakers have to come together. See, now what's happening is most of these industries, right? Like I told you, Saudi Aramco funded my research. So Saudi Aramco funded my research because they know they are the ones causing the problem. Same is happening in the US. Most of the alternative energy projects, most of the sustainable energy products are funded by companies like Halliburton, ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil was one of the companies that prevented the release of the report saying that CO2 is being emitted in large quantities. They said no. See, because these people have a lot of power with lobbies in the political theater. Yeah, but now they've realized they cannot do this forever, right? Even they are running out of fossil fuels. So they are getting actively involved. So more and more they get involved and they put money into this, realizing these technologies. See, they're not only funding universities, they are doing in-house research. Like for example, Saudi Aramco, they have their own research facility for carbon capture, and they are doing it on scale.
all the oil exporters also.
Yeah,
Working shipping to like,
correct.
the US, they,
Take from Saudi Aramco.
and in our own state, they are not following what they are being told. Various articles or those.
Correct.
This big, carbon capture facility that you have shown,
Yeah.
how much they are capturing?
I mean, I should have put the numbers, but I think they plan to capture almost 20 tons of CO2 per day or more. Like it's in gigatons. Like the facilities are huge. They occupy the facility is almost like a island, like it's by itself. And they're planning to put it everywhere else where it's feasible.
Is it possible to make small units that you can put on every house?
They are working on that, but it's too expensive right now. Those units, for example, when I was working in JNCASR, we wanted to use their unit to capture the CO2 from the flue gas. Each unit is like the smallest possible unit is around $600,000. So I don't think.
Harvesting did help.
Yes.
So
Similarly, if they make this on a small scale, but I think because it's not caught on, right? Because ultimately the government has to get involved. Like policymakers have to get involved and say that, okay, if you do this, we'll give you a certain amount of tax credit or something. Otherwise, no one's going to get onto this. Like when they started giving subsidies for solar panels, many more people started putting solar panels in their home. And now they're giving electricity to the government. So those kind of things, decisions have to be made. Like even cars, they need to start saying that, if you use a certain type of car that's more fuel efficient, we'll give you some credits.
what is the challenge in the cooling down the CO2 temperature? Because the industry is also talking to
Yeah. Yes. So that's why when I showed you that first slide, that amine solution, right? Over time it degrades. And then you have to replace the whole thing. Every 6 months you have to replace. Yeah. But that's why these porous materials, see, they can withstand temperature up to 500 degrees Celsius. So they are more like that.
The metal,
It's a metal organic frame. What it does is, it's like usually aluminum, it's very cheap, can be easily made. I can give the procedure to anybody here and they can make it tomorrow in a chemistry lab. So that's how they've made it. They've scaled it up to like kg quantities.
there is cooled up.
No, it'll cool. See, because that's the biggest problem in these porous materials, right? Heat. So not just for CO2, even for water. When you capture water, see, even this case, right? They've only demonstrated on this scale. When you start going into larger and larger scales, the heat component is more. It becomes worse. So you have to make materials thinking long term, thinking that, okay, now I'm seeing only so much heat. When I scale the quantity up to kgs, how much heat? So this is where engineers have to come into the picture. See, chemists, people like me, and we just do basic science, fundamental science, right? So we can make the material and show, oh, wow, it's great, it works. But when we scale it up, we start seeing problems. So the equipment to hold these materials has to be designed by engineers. So that is another thing that's lacking. And if we do that, like in the West, people usually scale it up and they have a plan for it. Like the Climeworks company, it took at least 20 years to develop a model of direct air capture thing.
The shipping, they have insured the stuff. What it should.
Yeah.
But the thing is maintaining it.
Yeah.
Since we have the seawater, it's very easy to pull, but land, it is very difficult.
You'll need to have a set.
So, but India is what will it say?
Yeah.
All the things that been happening. Adequately, we are going to put it more.
Yeah, for sure. That's what the thing is. Once you make the material, it may be a wonder material, but a lot of other people have to come together and decide, okay, what are the additional challenges that are coming that the chemist or the scientist cannot answer. So they have to build the technology development around it, around the material, whatever that's a great material, has to also happen. Yeah.
Suppose all these data. Carbon capture and all these things, suppose we succeed in carbon. In what ways it can contribute to other kinds of environment?
See, the thing is,
Can it contribute?
there will always be a new challenge. Once you fix one problem, a new challenge will come, because basically now these materials, right, all these catalysts and all, they're going to have a lifetime. After some time, how to discard them, how to take care of them, how to dispose them will come in. But that's a bridge we should cross, like slowly. On the way to achieving this, we should start thinking of that also. But you're right, there will be challenges of those kinds also. So
We were talking about water capture from the atmosphere. I think all of us do it all the time. So every time you turn your AC on, there is a water condensate that collects. And I think once you run your AC at 25 degrees centigrade, and I think it's 1 ton of whatever. You tend to collect about 3/4 of a bucket of water in the morning. It runs for the entire night. So that is something like about 8 liters of water. And mind, it is pure water.
Yeah.
So that is actually
condensed from the
atmosphere. It's absolutely pure. And I've asked a few AC people, why can't you incorporate with your AC a water filter at the other end? So the water that is condensed goes to the water filter, and then you get drinking water out of it.
So this has to be made, again, this is something the government itself, if they can force this, if people to do this.
So you're not wasting that water.
Correct.
Many of that water is just let to go into the ground, just let it out. It goes away. But if you actually collect it, I just checked once, about 3/4 of a bucket of water that you get. Overnight. At 25 degrees.
I thought it is the cost effectiveness.
Yes. So again, so if there's no profit, no one's going to get onto this. So you have to convince people that there is a profit eventually. Otherwise,
is just asking is cost effective.
I mean, right now, see, on the large scale, it has not been proven to be cost effective yet. See, sustainability, yes. But cost effective, all these materials, right? Like I told you, what smallest unit is $600,000. And the material you're putting in it to capture this, the MOF, it doesn't come cheap. Right now, this one MOF is there, this CALF 20, which is very cheap, which can be scaled. But ultimately, buying large quantities of it, making sure your reactor or your unit has it in proper quantities, all that is going to be not cost effective. You will incur. They look at that only. Yeah.
Just tell it.
Yeah, it will change.
And any cost to get your thing done.
Your definition of cost effective will change at that point.
We worry about cost.
You want water? Yeah. But again, when you burn it, it's going to get CO2, right? See, the only thing is circularity, but the CO2, if you capture and make, you can make LPG from CO2, you can make methanol. All the things that you're using as fuel right now, like CNG also can be made from CO2. But the point is, ultimately, when you burn and use that fuel, you will release CO2 back into the air. But that's why I'm saying it's important to make this circularity thing compulsory.
Using the CO2 is much easier than the process.
Yeah.
Capturing the CO2 is the challenge.
Using it is very, I mean, once you make the fuel, it's very easy. Anybody can burn that. You have enough combustion engines to burn all the fuel.
Sorry. Policy decision for the government. Why don't we take the problem to the parliamentary standing committee?
They are aware of all this. And in fact, they are the ones also now giving funding. So what they are doing is they're also asked, they're putting huge amounts of money into this, but it's only now, only in the last 2 or 3 years. We're getting a lot of funding for that, but I don't know.
instead of government, we can tell the Adani about it.
They are also doing it.
You are-
They are also actually doing it. So in TIFR, there's a professor called Vivek Polshettiwar. He has started scaling up his catalyst, and Adani is doing it. So Adani, at least Adani is doing it because he is the biggest polluter, right? So he's investing in Bangalore also, he's investing in Bombay also. So they're taking these technologies and trying to translate them. They're infusing a lot of money into this.
I think the policy is right. It should be changed. Like Adani, if he is polluting more, then he has to consult more.
Yeah.
Yes, for purpose, they can, instead of making a payment to the government, they can ask for funds for the.
Very important of freedom, sir. You know how to control, what to do.
See, but then all our energy comes from Adani only, no? All the electricity, whatever.
The main important for freedom.
I think we have time is number any last question. Say it's quite.
Yeah, especially students like you guys should get involved in all.
It was a good lecture. So, sir talked about nature's way of dissolving CO2 in water.
Yes.
So, ocean is abundant. So, why can't we dissolve like the delta G value for dissolving CO2 gas to CO2 liquid is negative.
Yes.
So, why can't we dissolve CO2 in oceans? Because oceans are abundant, no? So,
You can do it, but then there are things living in the ocean also, right?
carbonic acid when dissolved in ocean.
Yes, but it ultimately leads to
Water temperature also increasing. We have the problem.
Yeah. So that's it'll affect the. See, now the CO2 which you're saying, right? Ultimately, you're going to have some of the animals in the water bodies. They survive on the very small quantities of oxygen that you have. This CO2 getting extends. That's also actually a problem. This CO2 involved getting dissolved in the water. It's a problem. It's causing greater acidity. And if you see in Australia and all these coral reefs, because of the slight increase in this acidity, the coral reefs they're also living things, right? So they're getting dissolved. So it's not a good thing actually. It may be a way to take care of the CO2 from the air, but you're causing a different problem. But the animals that keep this whole ecosystem alive may not. Yeah, its acid is very low. Exactly.
IMO is more concerned about polluting the sea.
Yeah, because
Maritime organization is more stringent rules.
For CO.
You cannot like earlier pump to the sea at all. It's huge fine. Even the shipping cannot do it. Other side we don't know. The land people were not known about what is the. IMO is very concerned about the polluting.
Yeah, so the sea. Yes, okay.
Maybe a social aspect of this issue. See, you said that India is, the contribution of India is very less compared to
Relatively,
and the per capita also will be still low. So, as a nation, even if you do a lot of capturing and reducing the emission of carbon dioxide, the impact on the global problem will not be that much.
Yeah, so everyone has to do it.
Our contribution, even if you implement a lot of things, our contribution will be less compared to other countries like USA. So whether the efforts to address this issue is proportionately, being done, or it is it's a burden of all.
See, this is a good question, but the thing is, but if we say that, okay, unless they start, we won't start, it will never take off. See, it's actually not happening equally. Like US is not bothered at all. They have not implemented, they're putting money, but they don't care that much. Whereas in Europe, it's a huge focus. Like in Europe, they're trying to slowly phase out fossil fuels. They want to build an ammonia ecosystem, or they want to focus on all types of alternative.
Importing a lot of fuel from Russia. That is
but at least they are a lot less dependent on oil than. See, in Europe, they use public transport more readily. Not everybody has a car there. They use public transport. They have a beautiful public transport system. And even in India, one of the reasons we are less polluting is because we have a proper public transport system. Tomorrow, if that disappears, we're finished. It will start contributing even more to CO2. So this has to be, everybody has to decide together. That's why we have this COP26 every year, right? All these countries come together and they try to take decisions as a unit. but people have given up trying to tell the US what to do. So
Any more questions? I think we can write them. KAUST. Let's see. Make a wonderful plan. Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.
Next invite, there's a moment from ACM to Dr. Raghu Ganesh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This is a small announcement. Dr. Burgan, sir, and Dr. Venkatesh, sir, also. Please.
On August 11th, we have got a March for size. There is a lot of this program to highlight the significance of science, to impress upon the public as well as the government that science should be encouraged. More and more funding should be done here. More and more scientific things should be encouraged. This March for Science is actually a program which happens throughout the world. This program is run throughout the world. In America, in Europe, and everywhere. On March 11th, they are conducting this March for Science. It is sensitizing the public, it is sensitizing the government, it is sensitizing everyone on the nature of science, utility of science, why should we just do it here, how to do science in a much more constructive way. Okay, all these problems which so far we have been seeing this because of the development of science and technology which has contributed